So, think of maybe your favorite video game growing up, whether you've played with, Super Nintendo or some other type of gaming system, or, whether you've played any sort of arcade games, or, you have kids as well, whether they'll be growing up playing some sort of video game in the coming years as well. Personally, for me, video games have really played a really influential part of my childhood growing up. I really grew up, playing video games in my household. However, recently in the media, there have been a lot of really negative portrayals of video games, whether they've been shown to be, bad for your health or, part of the development of some sort of a violent or aggressive, nature within children. And just a bunch of other really, negative stereotypes that have been, associated with video games, especially recently in the media. But, what if gaming actually does a lot more good than that? What if the ways that we interact with video games can actually, teach us a little bit more about ourselves? And so essentially that's what I'm doing in my project. I'm taking a look at the way through specific video games or one specific social experiment that's surrounding a video game can essentially teach us a little bit about human nature and, how communities and just how specific psychological things work within groups of humans. And so essentially the method through which I'm doing that is by taking a look at a social experiment called Twitch Plays Pokemon, which is essentially based around the video game in itself, Pokemon. And it's a social experiment where thousands of players are essentially able to control one character at the same time. And it's essentially led to the development of a massive online community around it. And so today in my presentation, what I'm going to take a look at are 3 main points. The first thing is, what inherently about humans, drives us towards, playing video games? Like, what about us, really draws us towards it? And how that's represented in Twitch Plays Pokemon. How this inherent part of human nature is kind of represented in society. Also taking a look at this specific element through a specific theory, of a specific psychological theory that I'll get into. And then what this means going forward in my specific project. So the first point that I'm taking a look at is really humans inherently seek to reach goals. And so game designers essentially use the specific concepts, like goal attainment through a simulation of time within a game to kind of parallel real-life outcome expectations for achieving goals. And so essentially, video game designers can use this specific nature of humans within a video game setting, to mimic real life. And so essentially, this specific element of human nature can be used to parallel real life. And so that's one specific element of human nature that kind of is a parallel between video games and real life. And so essentially, Twitch Plays Pokemon in itself teaches us about this aspect of human nature, because people essentially naturally kind of seek out order from chaos in a way through cooperation in order to reach these specific goals within the end of the game. And so essentially how Twitch Plays Pokemon works is, so Twitch in itself is essentially a streaming website where people can kind of stream their own video games and people can kind of comment in a chat box. And so essentially how this specific experiment works is that someone essentially rigged up a bot of the Pokemon game where it takes all the inputs from the comments themselves and uses those inputs to control the character in itself. So all of these viewers can put in specific commands like up, right, down, A, B, all of these different commands, and these control the character in itself. So that's essentially how Twitch Plays Pokemon works. And basically, in this way, it kind of shows how all of these different people at the same time really have to use cooperation in order to reach this one specific end goal of, beating the game in itself. So that's one specific element of it. And then how does this in itself kind of relate to the formation of communities and societies, which is the main point that I'm looking at in terms of, connecting the community that's formed around Twitch Plays Pokemon and the formation of communities in real life. And so how I'm taking a look at this is through one specific theory behind the psychology of community formation, which is the McMillan and Chavis's theory of community formation. And so essentially this specific theory has four main elements that kind of integrate, this one inherent part of human nature where people are really striving towards attaining goals and using this one specific element and incorporating them into a bunch of other elements that are kind of representative within the formation of a effective community, both, in a real life setting within the formation of civilizations, as well as, even like communities around specific cultures, like this specific theory has been used to study the formation of, a science fiction community as well. So it kind of has a lot of applicability in terms of using this one specific theory. And so essentially what I'm doing is looking at these specific elements of this specific theory, both in the context of Twitch Plays Pokemon, as well as in the formation of real life communities, essentially, bridging the gap between the two. And so essentially, my final goal for this project would be essentially to write an academic paper that analyzes the community that forms around Twitch Plays Pokemon from this specific psychological lens in order to show the similarities between this specific community, that's formed around a video game, and then our own specific communities within real life. And in a sense, what I'm really trying to strive towards with this project is to really increase the credibility of video games as, a type of schematic through which we can, learn about the formation of our own communities and about, human life within itself. So that's pretty much, 7 minutes. And so essentially, these connections are just kind of one way of just showing really how applicable video games are, both essentially as learning and teaching tools, whether through enlightening us about specific social interactions within our own communities or, potentially also being teaching methods within having a use in terms of educational learning. Because video games, as well as, teaching us about community formation, they can teach us about problem-solving skills and cooperation, among other skills. And so though, video games, we kind of associate them as a form of entertainment, I really hope to show through this project that video games perhaps can be so much more. Yeah. So at that point, any questions?
Yeah, I have lots of questions.
Sure.
Are the questions on video?
What?
I forget whether the questions are on video.
Yes, I think
they are.
so.
Okay. First of all, I really think that you have a very interesting project. To be honest, I didn't know a lot about it, so I was very interested to kind of find out that you were looking at this through the lens of community formation. So can you tell me a little bit more about this formation of communities, what's the framework for this psychological, is it like a theory?
It's essentially a theory,
okay.
And so basically what it has is four specific elements. One element is membership, so it's basically taking a look at how elements like boundaries, establishment of a sense of belonging, and personal investment within a community, how those specific factors contribute to, personal worth within a community,
okay.
And a greater feeling of, trust that's established between individuals within a community.
Okay.
So that's essentially one element. Another element is essentially influence. So what effect does acknowledgement of others' needs, values, and opinions have on the sense that each individual in a community has of their own feelings kind of mattering or having influence within the community? Integration and fulfillment of needs, so essentially how does joining this community solve a problem within the community or within the society as a whole in order to make investing time into the community seem worthwhile? And then the fourth would essentially be a shared emotional connection. So what are each of these individuals getting out of this experience? What kind of unique experiences are actually going on within the community? And so essentially this theory is kind of developed as a result of taking a look at multiple communities and what specific elements have made those successful. And essentially, I'm using those specific elements to take a look at Twitch Plays Pokemon.
Okay, so where are those elements sort of in what you're observing in Twitch Plays Pokemon? You know, like where's the like what's your proxy measure for like membership and for influence?
So essentially what I'm taking a look at in terms of determining like the connections to this specific theory is by taking a look at personal accounts of how people have felt throughout the entire experience. So I do have a timeline of the entire game in itself, and like the entire process of the game within itself, like the progression, but within completing the game. And then essentially the entire community in itself is developed essentially on Reddit. And so basically there's a massive subreddit on Twitch Plays Pokemon where people have kind of been posting continuously and commenting and really interacting within the community on like through that specific context. And so essentially what I've been doing is taking a look at all these individual accounts to see what kind, like how people have been feeling at specific points within the game, and like essentially seeing what specific elements relate to those specific experiences.
So you're basically developing a scale by which you'll sort of like take comments in the big subreddit thread and use that as a way to tell us something about membership, tell us something about influence.
Exactly.
Can you give an example of one of those? That's very interesting. Like
Sure.
what's something that you've been teasing out of the data?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been looking, I have this entire document where I have like a close, I think I had, as of last week, maybe 100, but I've been going to closer to 150 to 200 right now, of just specific comments that I found really interesting. And I think there was one that really struck me near the end of where people were like where pretty much the game in itself, where they completed the game, and it was showing how this person was really surprised that